Okay, so let's try a little thought experiment. Imagine you get a letter from a close friend, a friend who's in prison, possibly even on death row. What are you expecting to read? Words of despair, right? Maybe anger? Well, we're about to look at a 2,000-year-old letter sent from a Roman prison by the Apostle Paul, and it contains something completely different. It's a message that's puzzled and inspired people for centuries, and we're going to unpack why.
To really get this letter, we have to go back in time. We're talking about Philippi, a really important Roman colony in what's now northern Greece. I want you to picture a city just buzzing with Roman pride, full of retired soldiers and sitting on a major trade route, kind of like the superhighway of the ancient world. And here's the kicker. This was the very first city in Europe where Paul ever preached. This place was special to him.
But here's the thing. Paul isn't in Philippi. He's writing to them from a Roman prison cell. This isn't some casual postcard. This is a letter from their mentor, the guy who started their whole community. And his future is looking, well, it's looking pretty grim.
And this is where the story takes a turn that you just don't see coming. From this dark, uncertain place, Paul doesn't write about fear or bitterness. He sends them a letter that is just overflowing with joy. It's a deep, resilient kind of joy that seems to completely defy his circumstances. So the huge question is, how is that even possible? And what on earth can that teach us today?
So to really get to the heart of what Paul is saying, we first have to understand the world he was writing to. Let's dig into the context. Now, you have to understand, this letter wasn't just a friendly hello. Paul was writing because the community in Philippi was in the middle of a serious crisis. They were basically fighting a war on two different fronts. And these weren't vague problems. On the outside, they were facing serious opposition, maybe even persecution from their neighbors. But honestly, the bigger threat was coming from the inside. Things like selfish ambition and pride were causing major divisions, tearing them apart. It got so bad that Paul actually calls out two women by name, Euodia and Syntyche, and basically tells them to sort out their public disagreement. And the result of all this chaos? A cloud of anxiety was just hanging over everyone.
So how does Paul deal with their fear of persecution? He does something nobody would expect. He totally reframes it. He tells them their suffering isn't a sign of failure or punishment. Instead, he calls it a privilege, a gift even. He's saying, look, this is part of the journey you've been invited into. It's a completely radical way to look at hardship. Now, to tackle that internal conflict, the infighting, Paul knew a list of rules just wasn't going to cut it. He needed to give them something much more powerful. He gives them a single, ultimate example that has the power to change everything. See, Paul's solution isn't a behavior plan. It's a complete rewiring of their perspective. He wants to give them a brand new mindset. He calls it having the mind of Christ. And to show them what he means, he shares this beautiful piece of poetry that many scholars think was actually an early Christian hymn.
It all starts with Jesus, who he says existed in the form of God. So the highest possible status, right? But instead of clinging to that power, instead of grasping that equality, he emptied himself. Now, you have to remember, in the Roman world, honor and status were everything. So this move is just unthinkable. He voluntarily gives up the ultimate privilege to take on the lowest possible status imaginable, that of a slave. And the depth of this humility is just staggering. It wasn't just about becoming human. It was about obedience all the way to death. And not just any death, the most shameful, brutal, public execution in the Roman Empire, crucifixion. This, Paul says, is the ultimate picture of this new mindset. So Paul takes this huge cosmic theological idea and he boils it down into one simple, life-changing instruction. For all their arguments and ambitions, what does this humility actually look like on a Tuesday in Philippi? It looks like this. You value others above yourselves. You treat one another as more important than you are. That's the heart of it all. And once you get that central idea, honestly, the rest of the letter just clicks into place. Everything else he says is just an application of this new way of thinking. And to show he's not asking them to do something he hasn't done, Paul uses himself as the prime example. On the left, that's his old resume. And by any standard of his day, it was perfect. This guy was a superstar. But with this new mindset, he reevaluates the whole list. All those things he was so proud of, he now considers them liabilities, a loss. He even calls them rubbish or dung. Now that is a radical shift in values. So how does this new mindset help with all that anxiety we talked about? Well, Paul gives him a really practical 4-step guide to peace.
First, rejoice. Not because things are great, but find your joy in the Lord, always. Second, don't let anxiety win. Actively replace it with prayer. Third, when you pray, do it with thanksgiving. And fourth, be intentional about what you let your mind dwell on. Focus on what is true, honorable, pure, and good.
And all of this builds to the powerful conclusion of his letter. Because this new way of thinking doesn't just fix their internal problems, it produces a truly radical and countercultural way of life.
Paul tells them that because of this mindset, he's learned a secret. It's the secret of contentment. It's a deep-down peace that isn't dependent on what's happening around him. It doesn't matter if he's hungry or well-fed, in need or has plenty. His joy, his contentment, it's unshakable. And remember, he's writing this from a prison. This brings us to one of the most famous and maybe most misunderstood lines in the whole letter. This is not about Paul having the superhuman power to accomplish any goal he sets his mind to. It's his explanation for his contentment. His ability to face any situation, to find joy in a dungeon, comes from a strength that is not his own. So in the end, this ancient letter from a Roman prison cell leaves us with a question that is just as real today as it was 2,000 years ago. When the world around you is chaotic, when circumstances are completely out of your hands, what is the one thing you can control? Paul's answer is simple but profound: your mindset. And he suggests that changing that one thing has the power to change everything else.